Welcome to Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson, the Executive Director of Rock Solid Families.
And I'm Merle Hutchinson, President of Rock Solid Families. And we are excited to have you join us as we talk all things faith, family, and fitness. A special thanks to Maxwell Construction and Mansfield Insurance Agency for their support of Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community one family at a time. Right, this is Merle Hutchinson for Rock Solid Radio, and I am here with my most darling wife. Hey, darling, that's a southern word, is it, darling?
Since when did you have a southern accent?
I can be all things.
Through Christ who gives me strength.
That's right. How are you this morning, Miss Linda?
I don't know when people are going to listen to this, but it's raining today. It's kind of yucky, cold rain.
This is why this show and God had perfect timing.
Yeah,
so
the
this is
taping
going
of
to be
perfect.
This show is going to step on some toes, and primarily my own.
Yeah,
and,
you're the one that wanted to talk about this.
I know, because it's that time of year, and so we're going to get into talking a little bit about it. So this show today is really digging into not just marriages and parenting and all that, but it's really just talking about how we approach our life, no matter the age that we're at or our situation. And so we're going to get into that a little bit. We're going to be talking about the idea of being comfortable.
Which a blanket right now in front of a fireplace would be really comfortable right now.
Yeah, right now it's like 42 degrees, rainy, yucky, gray, dark, and it's morning. So as we record this. So anyway, with that all being said, these are little triggers that we have for saying, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable and I'd like to seek out some comfort. And that in and of itself is not always bad, right? But we're going to get into how we start to understand when it is good, when it gets to be dangerous, what it might lead us to, that kind of stuff.
So when comfortable becomes harmful.
Yes. Yeah. It ultimately leads us, or could lead us, to a place that we find a lot of discomfort in, even pain. We see that all the time after years of doing something that was comfortable, and now we find ourselves in a very painful situation. So we better say thank you to our sponsors.
Yeah, we're so thankful for Maxwell Construction. Maxwell was founded in 1988 by John Maxwell. Since that time, Maxwell Construction has grown and expanded to become among the most recognized commercial construction companies in the tri-state. What separates Maxwell Construction apart from their competition is their emphasis on being service-oriented to help meet the needs of their customers. So whether it's a school, a hospital, restaurant, apartment center, retail center, Maxwell Construction is able to meet your needs. So call Maxwell Construction today at 812-537-2200.
All right, so that sounds great. And also, we do appreciate the fine folks over at Maxwell Construction. They've continued to come behind us and support us, so thanks for what they do. But we also have another local sponsor that has gone above and beyond to make sure that we get the opportunity to keep pushing the message that we believe is so important. This is a big thank you out to Mansfield Insurance Agency. Mansfield Insurance Agency has built a reputation built on caring and listening and protecting their customers. They began in 1981, and they've been dedicated to the individuals and businesses in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. So if you have an insurance need, call Mansfield Insurance Agency at 800-230-3927. That's 800-230-3927.
Yeah, we are just so thankful to Mansfield Insurance Agency and Maxwell Construction, and they have been awesome, hun, coming alongside us to sponsor us and to support Rock Solid Families and Rock Solid Radio. We also just want to thank, hun, the many, many families and churches who have come alongside us and said, we believe in healthy and strong families. And so we want to thank them. And we also are, in the month of November, hun, as we start to prepare our 2020 budget, we are looking to, increase that partnership to have more sponsors come alongside us and partners to come with us in this journey for really helping our families in our homes.
And let's clarify a little bit on what this giving is. We need sponsorship and we need that support, but we ask that you would only consider sponsoring and giving and donating to Rock Solid Families if it was laid on your heart.
Yeah.
If you felt like it was of value, it was worthy. And, to give out of guilt is not what we're interested in. What we want you to do is be thoughtful about, what is it that I'm going to use my resources for in this life? And, we have all of our own things that we have to take care of, whether it's food, shelter, or clothing or whatever. But sometimes we have a little bit left over, and God lays it on our heart. And if you believe that what we are doing at Rock Solid Families and with Rock Solid Radio, if you believe that it's positively impacting and changing lives, then we just pray that you'd think about that and make us part of your contribution.
There's a lot of people out there, Hun, who believe that the mission that we have of strengthening families through God and His Word is the answer for communities, for schools, for churches. And so that's been exciting to see that we're not the only one that God laid this vision on. And so partnering together, I think we believe we can make a difference. And we are making a difference. We've seen that in hundreds of families who've walked through our door, as well as thousands who are being reached by podcasts and articles that we write and speaking engagements. So we're thankful for them.
Yeah. So let's get to topic.
Yeah.
I'm going to start right off the bat. I hate winter.
Oh, my goodness.
I hate
Do you have to
cold.
yell
I
that?
hate being uncomfortable.
You were just turned down the dial.
I just woke you up because you were a little uncomfortable, huh?
Yeah.
We talked at the beginning of the show about the weather and everything. And so the bottom line is you get to this point where you're like, nothing feels good. And so you start to dial back what you want to do. And one of the frustrations that I feel, just in particular about being uncomfortable this time of year, is I feel less productive. I'm a person
That's
who likes
why bears
to be,
hibernate.
I know, exactly. and God had great intentions with that. And so, I feel less productive. I'm a person who enjoys being outside, to like to do things outside. And when it's just nasty out and I am feeling uncomfortable, I tend to withdraw into the house, seeking comfort, and then my productivity level drops. And then I start to feel not as good about who I am. And so this little vicious cycle starts to build on itself. So,
well, Hun, there's a reality there of folks who have seasonal affective disorder that it does. I mean, SAD, you can look it up, and where the less, we just had daylight savings time and I should say. And so it's getting darker earlier. And so it's hard. It's hard for people. They find themselves in a greater state of depression and kind of being more idle and just kind of crawling under that blanket I talked about before.
Yeah. And so let's be clear. Let's talk about defining a few different words here so we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as my buddy Kyle still can't figure out what that means.
Yeah.
So there is no harm in comfort. We have pleasure seeking. We have skin receptors. We have
Comfort food.
We have comfort food. There's no harm in comfort. In fact, it's important. I compare this a little bit to in the workout world. Rest is just as important as work.
Yeah, we've done a show on that before.
Right. And so rest allows us to rebuild and replenish and to get ready to go do work again. And comfort is a lot like that. Comfort allows us to rest. If we're uncomfortable, it is hard to rest.
Sure.
And so comfort in and of itself is not a bad thing. And so we're not trying to say you shouldn't be comfortable, okay?
Well, we kind of are.
Well, no, hear us out. No, we're not saying you shouldn't be comfortable. You shouldn't allow comfort to become a complacency.
Okay.
And so complacency is really the dangerous word here. That comfort leads to complacency.
Yeah.
And so the complacency says, okay, I finally have I've arrived at a comfort zone or level that I like, and I'm not going to move.
Yeah.
I'm not getting off the couch, or I'm not taking a risk, or I'm not going to make a change because right where I'm at right now is very comfortable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so we don't use the word complacency very often, but the definition of complacency is self-satisfaction, but a lack of awareness of what pending trouble or problems are going to come. For instance, we have a friend who worked in the weight industry with kids in the medical field, and there was a lot of kids, weight reduction.
Okay.
And there was a lot of kids who came in who have just become very complacent and too comfortable, and they're not out exercising and they're
Right.
not eating right, and so that becomes when it's become dangerous.
Yes, yeah, and so the complacency actually is the thing that is the pathway to the pain or the hurt that we can lead to. So there's another word here. So there's comfort. That leads to complacency, but there's a word called contentment and being content, and this is kind of the tricky word because if we allow contentment to keep us in the comfortable spot, then that can be dangerous. But there's a possibility we could be content even when we're uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, contentment is biblical.
Yes.
Jesus wants us to be content, to being happy and satisfied. It's about a state of peace, but it doesn't mean you just sit there and wallow in, the muck. It does mean that you keep moving forward. It does mean you keep shooting for the better life that God has planned for you, and changing and growing. Growing is the key here. The difference between contentment and complacency is a very subtle one. Being content means happy. Being complacent means refusing to work to improve. Contentment goes hand in hand, I think, with gratitude, having a grateful heart
Right.
for what God has done in your life, even the good and the bad.
Yes, no matter your situation. It's a little bit like, when we're not very good at growing plants, right? We're not very good at growing plants. And growing plants is one of those things that you go, I want to have some of this greenery around the house or whatever.
Which we usually have fake greenery.
And that's my point. Like, people finally get to the point where they want to just go plastic. They want to go comfortable.
Oh, man,
yes.
you really...
Hey, this points to us because it takes work to actually go through and nurture something up. And so it's like, no, I'm not interested. I'll just get the plastic stuff. and again,
I've heard that you have to water those things.
Yeah, you do. We've actually killed air ferns before, which we were told you can't kill them, and we found a way to do that. And the worst part about that is I was a biology major.
Oh, yeah.
So I know how to kill them. I just don't do much to change it.
Yeah.
So anyway, the different ideas that we're talking about here of comfort and complacency and contentment we're going to try to weave these around. And the thing that I guess I probably need to do first is it's time for me to put my big boy pants on, right? Suck it up. It is cold. It's nasty. And so we could sit here and we could whine, or we could sit there and dream about being comfortable, all right? But that's not an action that's going to further me in terms of growth.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of time for us to figure out, okay, what am I called to do? Now, I also want to throw in another thought here. We're using the word comfort, but I could very easily replace that word comfort with stability, right? With safety, with security. These are things that people stay in a stable environment because...
Which they're all good things in themselves.
In and of themselves. And
Right.
that's the idea of whether they're going to lead to a complacency. And so stability, you and I have talked about that. Your need for stability is greater than my need. And so having stability, whether it's in paychecks or whatever, those are things that make you go, oh, I'm not sure if I want to take the risk.
Yeah.
And so these are things we're touching on today.
Sure. But hon, when we were first together and got married, I am so thankful that you took me out of my comfort zone. I have a very high level of the need of security and stability, and I'm not really high on the change level. I don't like a lot of change, and so therefore it was really tempting to stay in my hometown, going to my hometown church, live in my hometown neighborhood, going to my hometown grocery store, and that would have been my life. And I would have never taken the chance and challenge myself to see, okay, God, where do you want me? Maybe it is in my own town, in my own subdivision, but most likely it was because I was so comfortable.
Right. And at the starting line of change, the day that we introduce in our mind the idea of, well, let's do this. Let's do something different. It is totally uncomfortable.
I still remember packing up. My mom thought we had moved to Russia, and we had just moved to Indiana. And I had hardly ever been across the state line. I am from Northern Kentucky. And so just moving into Indiana, I was like, holy cow, I am out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And again, there can be drawbacks to making changes, and there can be mistakes, there can be failures, there can be
change for the sake of
bad
change.
things.
It's not necessarily.
Yes. So just flipping the table upside down for that sake is not what we're talking about here. It's the idea that when you look at where you're at, is this where you want to be 20 years from now? And the idea that we want to challenge ourselves to grow. And as Christians, we start to talk about not just challenging ourselves to grow, but to grow in Christ. And that growing in Christ is not always easy.
No.
All right.
Sometimes
That's
can be
where the
painful.
challenge, because he wants to prune us. He wants us to be better than we were at being more like him.
Speaking of pruning, I love that verse in John 15:2. Even the branches that were bearing fruit are pruned.
Yes.
It says, that we become even more fruitful when we're pruned. And so pruning can be painful. That's hard. And so that's something we have to keep in mind. Hun, I love this verse I love this quote from Peyton Manning, Indiana guy, Indianapolis Colts former quarterback. And he said, you have to decide, do you want to make things happen or do you want to watch things happen? It's been my experience that most of the people who watch things happen are the ones who are usually wondering what just happened. And so complacency kind of sits there and watches. Contentment acts. Contentment chooses. And complacency just kind of sits there and ignores things.
Yeah, growing up with my dad was always more of the adventurous one.
Yes, he still is.
And he's a risk taker, and he does things where oftentimes we shake our head going, what are you thinking?
But I love your dad.
But that is what we do love about him. But growing up with him, he wore all kinds of phrases out on us kids. But one of the phrases that he used all the time on us kids was, do something even if it's wrong. And again, we're not advocating doing wrong things. What we're advocating is get out and get dirty, make mistakes, be willing to take the risk, because you just never know what kind of fruit or reward that's going to produce.
Right.
And so doing nothing is really what we're ultimately talking about here. If we accumulate years of nothingness or just total comfort and stability, we get to a place in life where we go, what was all this for?
Yeah.
What was all this worth? Why did we do this?
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous place. All of a sudden we start to arrive at this place where we become grumpy old men instead of happy old men. We start to have regrets in our life. And one of the things that I will say even about my dad, he's had mistakes. So let's be very clear about that. And he's regretted some of those mistakes, just like we all would regret some mistakes. But he's never sat around waiting for somebody to do something for him. And I think Christ is very much in that same way. He's like, you are my hands and feet. Don't wait around for somebody else to do this for you. And so it's that whole idea of you're called to be the hands and feet. You go out and do things. You go out and get messy and dirty, and the rewards will come.
Yeah, hun. There's a lot of scripture that talks about the refining fire. God, Jesus uses the analogy of gold and the refining of gold. And the process of refining gold is an amazing one, because to purify the gold, the heat has to be cranked up. Yeah. And it's in the heating process, which I believe, if that's you, it's painful. If the heat's been on you, it can be painful. But in the refining of the gold, it's the dross, the impurities that rise to the top and then are skimmed off. And so I'm thinking, if we don't take a little heat, if we don't endure a little pain, if we don't get out of our comfort zone, we're never going to experience the rewards of the refining fire or the pruning that we mentioned before in John 15. It's just one of those things that God has shown us that, sometimes pain is,
Yeah.
leads to great blessings.
And, if you're not a Christian and if you don't understand the concept of faith, you oftentimes will get stuck in uncomfortable situations and you'll just flounder like, oh, no,
Or get
this
angry.
is not where I'm going to be. And so with faith, we get into uncomfortable situations and we say, we trust that something good will come of this. God uses all things for his good.
Yeah.
And if we believe that and we stay in the game, we start to see the fruit that comes out of these uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
And what a great thing to teach our kids. Because we're working with our kids every day, and there are many times they are in uncomfortable situations, and us looking at them saying give up, quit, that's not an option. Barrel through this, stay in it, and let's see what kind of fruit it produces.
It's hard. When I was in ministry, there was a lot of folks who dealt with a lot of pain, a lot of tragedy. And so it's really hard. And we tell folks all the time, this verse needs to be used very delicately. But Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. It's hard to look at someone who's gone through a painful experience like a death or a tragedy or trauma and say this to them. But that's ultimately what we're believing is Romans 8:28.
Yeah.
That God does work all things good. And so it's not that all things are good, but he will work for good. And so that's where sometimes the pain comes from.
Yes, yeah. So let's get into some help here. Let's talk about how we would guide somebody to get at least work through their complacency caused by their comfort. So the first thing we really want to talk about is what motivates you. What's your purpose in life? What are your gifts and your talents? These are things that oftentimes are sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
They're not being used to their fullest. We've all talked about, I've always said the worst athlete you can ever coach is the one that's full of talent and does not develop it.
Honey, I just got done working with a group of at-risk students in a large Cincinnati public high school, so I couldn't use the whole faith piece of it, but we were talking about, where do you want to be in 10 years, 20 years? And of course, they're just sitting there. And then we started talking about their gifts and talents. And I love the teachers and the helpers that were in that room started to point out some of the gifts and talents the students had. And then some of them started to dream about being a Marine or being a designer or being a professional athlete. And then we said, okay, well then work your way back.
Yeah.
What is it that you're going to have to do if in 10 years you want to be there? And so, but they're sitting in a classroom where they pretty much have given up. They're willing to just put their head on the desk and sit and sleep all day, and that it's gotten really comfortable in there.
Right.
But the fact is that that's not going to get them where they say they want to go.
Yeah, they're living in the moment, and a part of this is so once you kind of see what motivates you, what you think your purpose is, and your gifts and your talents is, starting to have vision. The people who are comfortable in their setting today and not desiring to get out are lacking vision. They can't see what the future brings because sitting on that couch continuously or not taking that risk to maybe move to a different job or to do something different that you're called to do or that you feel that itch to do is that whole idea of I'm just going to let it pass me by me because I don't see where it's going to get me.
Yeah.
I don't have the vision. And so dreaming is very important. This is something that you and I have talked about oftentimes. I have that dreaming in me. You have that stability. And we constantly try to use the iron on iron to push each other. You bring me in when I need to be brought in. I try to bring you out when we have to move and test each other.
What's so funny, hon, is that immediately I think about the whole conversation of adoption. By the way, November is Adoption Awareness Month. So, the topic of adoption was something the Lord laid on my heart before we were even married. And I would bring it up. And it was kind of something you're like,
and I was very uncomfortable. Let's just be straight up and clear on this.
But, that was a conversation that kind of was a dead end for a long time. But it was funny how the Lord put that vision in our head way before the children were brought into our lives. And so it was funny when the Lord brought our three youngest in our lives, we were really, really comfortable.
Yes.
We were empty nesters.
Why would we want to mess this up? Well, really, and that was, this is how God uses that comfort into complacency.
Yes. We could have sat there and said, no, life is good and we're good. But man, it was that vision that we had way before those conversations that we had decades before before that started to come back into our head like, we said this is something we were talking about.
And again, let's be clear, when we got married, two became one.
Yes.
And that was your vision.
Right.
That was not my vision. And so part of your work was to cast your vision onto me so that I could start to realize it. Because it wasn't of me, but because we're married, I knew it was of you. And I never just locked it away. It was like one of those things where it's like, I'll entertain it.
Right.
Because out of respect for you, I know it's something that you dream about and think about. I'll entertain it.
But out of respect for you, I couldn't beat you over the head with it either. I do remember, and I journaled about this 5 years ago, there was an Orphan Sunday at our church where they kind of presented
and you cried all the way through.
I did. I was actually up on stage leading the whole prayer time, and I was teary-eyed because that had been that vision, and it was amazing. 5 years, those seeds planted in your heart, and I'll never forget praying that night together, and you praying, Lord, if this is like almost like I'm leaving the door open, God, like show us if this is what, instead of like, no, this isn't.
Right.
It was a different prayer, and I remember journaling that, going, like it's starting to crack.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. And that's just the cool thing. When you surrender yourself to allowing God to dream through you, and then, as we talked about before, the first thing we have to do is really start to look at what motivates us. What is our itch? If that continues to be, and I want to be careful here. This is not a spontaneous itch, like all of a sudden, I'm manic.
Yeah, just fly off the handle and do it.
Yeah, this impulsivity. That's not what we're talking about. But you have these reoccurring thoughts or these itches. These are this discomfort that God creates in us to drive us, to motivate us. It causes changes in our life. It causes changes in job situations. And so the first thing is to recognize that. The second thing is to start to a plan of acting on it. I'm not talking about being impulsive. I'm talking about let's act on this.
Prayerfully
what would it look
discerning.
like? Yeah, even if I don't see exactly the fruit it's going to produce today.
Right. Hun, this is great because I know that there's somebody out there listening right now going, well, how do I know? How do I know if this is of God or if this is me? And that's when you really have to surround yourself with godly people, with wise counsel. So, if the Lord is planting a seed, or maybe the Satan is planting a seed, to know which one it is, you really have to one, test everything you're thinking and doing against God's word. Is it aligning with his word? Secondly, to get wise biblical counsel, to talk to someone that you trust, someone that you believe has the right intentions for your life and also the Lord's will, to kind of just run that by them. Like, what do you think that this is about? And then if it's painful or versus if it's going to be comfortable, I'm just going to tell you, it's probably the painful verse, the option that God's leading you to.
So,
discomfort.
And once you start to experience, so you've made the decision, you're going to jump, so to speak, fully embracing, and this is a phrase that we see used in the Special Forces training group, embracing the idea of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Think about what I just said, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. In other words, knowing I'm not where I'm at. With the idea of seeking comfort. I'm at where I'm at because I want to get to a different level of comfort, or I want to get to a better place. I want to develop. And so, I think of the Special Forces guys, and they'll be out in the mud or rain, like a day like today. They're not calling off training, right? Yeah. They're out, they're doing it, and they're uncomfortable so that they can be comfortable in that situation. And just think about that. The other side of it is, through this process, you are going to make things or be involved in things that in your mind you're going to call mistakes. You're going to say, this is a mistake. And when you do that, if you allow the way of the world to define what a mistake is, you very well will lose heart. And so understanding...
And go back under the covers.
Covers. And that's the scary part. We see people retreat. We've retreated from things that all of a sudden we go, wow, God was calling us to do something bigger than what we were doing. And so mistakes, I always talk about the idea of mistakes are only mistakes if we allow them to beat us down. If
we don't learn from them.
Yeah, and if we don't learn from those mistakes, then yes, they are a mistake. But this is that, as you talked about earlier, Hannah, that refining, that like, okay, I've got to be pruned a little bit more. So get the word mistake out of your mind and think of it as opportunity. Think of it as growth, because that's really what it is. When you get to the end of this trail, whatever this is, you're going to say, wow, I went through a lot, but look what I've gleaned from this.
Yeah, and hon, we have a lot of clients who come in. If you're kind of trying to decide, is this contentment or is this comfort? Kind of look at it as, will you have regrets? If your life ended, tomorrow, is today a day that you have regrets or peace? And so if you're always, what if, I wonder what I wish I did, then you're kind of sitting in the comfort.
Yeah.
I don't want you to have a life of regrets. I don't want you to feel like your life's been meaningless. So we have a lot of folks that come in and just say, I feel stuck.
Yeah.
I'm just wandering. And so we can sit down. We do a lot of goal setting with folks and kind of hold them accountable to say, okay, you say you want to do this. Then let's backtrack and say, what do you got to do in the meantime to get to where you want to be?
Yeah, and that's part of the beauty of coaching, because when somebody comes in and, for lack of a better phrase, when they're belly aching about their life, and we're getting the picture that they're stuck, the beauty of coaching and what we do is to say, okay, where do you want to go? And then coaches hold you to that. And it is amazing the number of people that will come in and bellyache, but then not do the homework that we've given. And as a coach, it's very frustrating, because you're like, wait, so this bothered you enough for you to complain, but you're not willing to do the work? And that's the uncomfortable part.
Right. One of the questions on our intake assessment is, how long have you been working through this challenge? And hon, there's some couples that have come in and said, we haven't been happy for a decade, for 2 decades. And it's like, you're kidding me. I cannot believe that you've sat and wallowed in this and just sat in that comfort, but it's just so miserable.
Yeah.
and it's,
but it takes a humble heart and a willingness to get uncomfortable, to surrender to that, and then start the work. And so I'll go back to one of the things in my life is I started to see this in the school setting when I was working with teachers, and I would see teachers getting more toward the end of their career. And many of them, especially in the teaching profession these days, because it just beats you up in so many ways.
Battlefield.
Yeah. They would start to turn grumpy.
Yeah.
It would start to turn into what I would refer to as a grumpy old man. And as I got into my later years, I started to feel that coming on to me.
You can see where it comes from.
Yeah, you can see, because you get beat down and you start to go, what is this about? And it became really my goal at that time that I was not going to die a grumpy old man.
Yeah.
I was not going to do that. That was my responsibility. And the difference is, for me, is that idea that I'm going to act on something that I'm called to do. I'm not going to stay, because you get trapped into the comfort zone.
Sure.
Well, I'm making a paycheck.
Right.
I have
or
a
I'm
house.
on SSI, or I'm on disability, or I'm on retirement, and so I'm just kind of cruising.
But I'm very discontent in all of the other areas of my life.
Yeah.
I don't have meaningful living.
I love the fact that in our classes, our fitness classes, we have folks that are in their 70s, and they are still very active and just staying physically fit and pushing themselves, not just staying in their comfort zone. They could be sitting in that recliner every day, but I am just so thankful for the men and women who are just saying, you know what? No, I'm going to go volunteer at the hospital, or I'm going to get out and walk every day, or I'm going to get a job at Home Depot and greet people at the door. It's just so amazing that they're willing not to just sit in their comfort, to keep pushing and to keep striving to where God wants to use them next.
Yeah. So let's just be very clear. Comfort in that complacency is the work of Satan. There is nothing more than Satan would love for you to sit on your hands, to do nothingness, and especially if it starts to erode away your whole perspective and view on life, to get to be that grumpy old man. And so because Satan knows that that's our way, I mean, he even uses it to tempt Christ. In Matthew 4, it didn't go through the whole thing here, but this basically, Christ was going without food for 40 days, right? Fasting for 40 days. I'm thinking he was a little hungry at the end of that. And so that is a very uncomfortable situation. And so in verse 2, he says, after after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry, meaning Christ. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. You know, if I'm in Christ's situation, I'm like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? Yeah, I need something to eat. And Christ was able to say, you know what, that comfort is not what I'm after.
Right.
That's not what we're about. I'm after something bigger than that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Satan uses wealth, and he uses comfort, and he uses all of these other things that fool us into thinking, if I only had this, I would be comfortable.
Hun, I just think you said wealth. I think of the rich young ruler in the Gospels where he wasn't willing to give up his comfort of his wealth to follow Jesus. I mean, he literally asked, what do I do? And he says, you know, give everything to the poor. And he's like, oh, can't do that. You know, he was not willing to follow Jesus and to give up his comfort. Or the lame man by the pool. I think of that in John 5, where he had been laying by that pool for 38 years. And Jesus looked at him and said, do you even want to get well?
Yeah.
You know, it ain't going to happen just laying there doing what you've done for 38 years. You got to get up.
Yeah, yeah. So our challenge to you guys is to say, you know, let's do an evaluation of where you are in your life. Let's talk about where you'd like to be. Where are your dreams? What do you want to have in your life? What does your life look like as you center it around Christ? Have you been living a life serving Christ? And all of these gifts that you have, whether it's making money or creating artwork or just nurturing people, whatever it is, are you using those things to build this kingdom? And once you start to wrap your head around that, let God start to pick on your heart. Let him start to pull on you. And this is the faith part. This is the part where you go, oh, so you're telling me I might have to sell this or quit this
Right,
or
or
start
do this.
this
Right.
or make change. And at that point, you jump in with faith. This is the importance of faith, and with no regrets. Right. I'm not going to regret it once we jump.
Don't look back.
When we started Rock Solid Families, there was many reasons that said you should not start this.
A lot of people try to tell us.
Finances being the primary one. And at this point, it started, and there are no regrets.
No.
And that doesn't mean every day has been easy.
No.
All right, but there are no regrets because we feel great meaning in the work that we
Right.
do.
Yeah.
And that's a gift that God gives us, that
Right.
meaning and that purpose.
And we're content in what God is doing, but we know we can't get complacent. We can't just
Right.
sit on our hands, that he continues to use us, continues to mold us. And, you know, I have a feeling we're going to send this radio show to quite a few of our clients to say, why don't you listen to this? Because we're talking about how can we help you get to your goals? We got to work backwards and say, what do you got to do today to get where you want to be tomorrow?
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully this is a great show that stimulates your thinking, that gets you off your couch, that gets you out into the rain, that allows you to say, I can do this, and I can do this through Christ, because now I have this driving force behind me that reassures that I will get to comfort. We're not avoiding comfort for the idea of, you know, it's bad or evil. We're just avoiding that complacency.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we better say thank you to our
Yeah.
sponsors and wrap things up.
Yeah, again, thank you to Maxwell Construction and all that they're doing to support Rock Solid Radio. We're so thankful for the Maxwell clan, as well as Mansfield Insurance Agency. We thank Jim Mansfield for his support and all that he's doing for our community. We thank you, our listeners, and we appreciate your time just investing in what we think is an important mission. So, you know, for my husband and I, we just want to thank you for tuning into Rock Solid Radio, and have a great day. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Rock Solid Radio. For help or more information about what you've heard on today's show, contact us at rocksolidfamilies.org or call us at 812-576-ROCK. That's 812-576-ROCK. Again, a huge thanks to our sponsors, Maxwell Construction and Mansfield Insurance Agency. If you have questions you'd like answered on our show, or you want to chime in on something you heard, go to our Facebook page, Rock Solid Families. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to tune in next week for another episode of Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson, and for my husband Merle and I, thanks for tuning in to Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community, one family at a time.